5 figures came out of the snow and changed a man who thought his heart had frozen for good. The lonely ranch, high in the Colorado hills, was about to become something no one riding those trails would ever believe. This is the winter Reed Callahan stopped surviving and started belonging. Late November 1882, frost rode the wind early through the high country above. Silver Butte in the Colorado Territory. Reed Callahan had already sealed his cabin, windows with oilcloth, and stacked the last of his firewood against the outer wall. He wasn't expecting company. He never did. The nearest town sat 12 miles down a steep rock-choked trail, and the closest neighbor had died the previous spring. His cabin stood alone against the slope, broad and stubborn, built by Reed's own hands, 6 years earlier after he walked away from the army and decided he preferred the company of goats to men. He was 32, quiet, and carried more memories than supplies. Before this life, he'd served as a translator, Apache, Spanish, Comanche, called in when the military wanted negotiations instead of gunfire. But he'd seen blood anyway, too much of it. Young women shot during raids, children shoved into wagons, elders left half buried in their own blankets. When he tried to speak against it, no one listened. So he left. Silence suited him better. That afternoon, he was behind the cabin splitting spruce logs, sap still sticky under his gloves. The leather had worn through, at both thumbs, and his left boot had a crack along the heel. He swung steady, not for exercise, not to clear his head, just because winter devoured wood faster than a man expected. A kettle warmed on the stove inside, goat meat ready for stew, when the quiet shifted. Not wind, too measured. Reed froze mid-swing and listened. Footsteps, several. Light, cautious, human. He moved around the cabin, hand near the revolver at his belt, but not drawing. As he stepped past the split-rail fence, he saw them. 5 women stood at the edge of the clearing, where snow met scrub. No horses, no wagon, just bare feet wrapped in rags, red and raw from cold. Their dresses had once been leather or cotton, now patched, torn, crusted with frost. Blankets hung from their shoulders, more hope than warmth. The one in front, dark hair tied back with sinew, strong, full-figured, took a single step forward. Her lips were cracked, but her eyes didn't waver. Reed said nothing. Neither did she at first. Then, calm and direct, she spoke. "We need shelter. One night." Nothing more. Reed looked at her, then past her. He saw what she wasn't saying. A younger girl behind her had blood frozen down her leg. Another held her arm like the joint had slipped wrong. One woman carried only a cloth satchel. These weren't wanderers. They were survivors. Reed glanced toward the trees behind them. No riders, no posse. Just still woods and falling cold. The last stranger he'd helped had robbed him blind and left him tied in his own barn. But these weren't to men with lies in their pockets. These were Apache widows. He saw it in the way they stood, proud, watchful, worn thin but not broken. He opened the gate without a word. They entered slowly, one by one, eyes on him as they passed. Pine, blood, and winter clung to their clothes. The oldest, tall and broad with deep lines cut by weather and grief, gave him a single nod but no thanks. Inside, the fire burned low. Reed added a log, shifted the kettle, and pulled 6 tin bowls from the shelf. He ladled out thick stew from the night before, root vegetables and meat, and handed each bowl over. They sat in a loose circle near the hearth. The one who'd spoken, he would later learn her name was Sayan, knelt closest to the heat, palms open toward the flames. Her dress was torn across the chest, roughly stitched once and ripped again. The skin beneath was sunburned and chilled. She didn't try to hide it. Reed felt his jaw tighten. Not from desire, not from shame, but from anger at whoever had done that to her. The youngest girl trembled as she drank, silent, wide-eyed, exhausted beyond tears. They hadn't come for pity. They had come because nowhere else remained. After they ate, Reed handed out folded wool blankets. He didn't ask names. Trust wasn't built with questions. He unrolled extra bedrolls near the stove. The floor was hard, but warmer than the snow outside. He placed the last blanket beside Sayan. She looked up at him, not afraid, just assessing his stance, the gun at his hip, the fact that he was alone. She knew what he could do if he chose. He didn't choose. He walked to the window, rifle across his lap. and watched the dark for anyone who might follow. Behind him, he heard them settle, low whispers in a language that sounded like wind through grass. One brief soft laugh, a murmur that might have meant home or the memory of it. Reed didn't sleep much that night. Responsibility sat in his chest, heavy as the snow gathering on the roof. And for the first time in years, he didn't mind the weight. Morning came sharp and colorless. Reed woke in the chair, boots still on, neck aching. Inside, all 5 women still slept, curled in blankets, breaths slow and even. The fire had burned to coals. The tall older woman lay nearest the door like a guard. The youngest had folded into herself, knees tight to chest. Reed relit the stove, moving quietly. By the time pale light reached across the floor, Cyan stirred. She pushed up on one elbow, hair loose, dress wrinkled and still torn. She watched him in silence. He gave a small nod. She stood and joined him. No words passed. He handed her the coffee tin. She measured grounds without asking. Soon the cabin filled with the smell of brewing coffee. The others woke to warmth and steam rising from tin cups. Breakfast was leftover stew again. No one complained. Afterwards, Cyan stepped outside. The others followed. Reed stayed back, watching through the window. They didn't wander. They worked. Cyan checked the goat pen. Another woman mended a torn blanket on the porch. One circled the cabin, scanning the hills. Another hauled water without being told. Survivors never sat idle. Reed went out and resumed splitting wood. Cyan joined him, stacking kindling with slow, stubborn strength. Snow dampened her dress. The tear along the neckline gaped when she bent. But she never looked to see if he noticed. By midday, he set out what little supplies he had: flour, salt, dried pork. 2 of the women began kneading dough, like muscle memory had been waiting for it. Their rhythm filled the cabin with quiet purpose. Questions pressed at Reed's mind, but he held them back. Late afternoon, Cyan stood in the doorway and finally offered answers. "We came from below Fort Garland. Ranchers raided us drunk, said we were hiding warriors. We weren't." Bruises marked her temple and neck. "Most of our men died months ago. They didn't care. Widow or not, they take." Reed nodded once. "Understanding didn't need words. They burned our shelter. We walked 5 days. Saw your smoke. A lone man is a risk. But winter's worse." Reed studied her a moment. "You guessed right," he said quietly. She gave the faintest smile. "We won't stay long. Just enough to walk again." He didn't answer. That evening he set out spare tools. Another axe, nails, rope. No explanation. By dusk, the back gate was fixed, a curtain mended, the door latch repaired. Reed sat on the porch with coffee, watching them move like they had always belonged there. Not one asked what he wanted in return. Not once did he set rules. When Cyan passed him, her hip brushed his knee, maybe by accident, maybe not. Their eyes met. That night they slept closer to the stove. The older woman guarded the door again. The youngest curled beside another for warmth. Cyan lay nearest Reed's chair, facing him in the dim firelight. "I know what men expect," she said softly. He said nothing. "I know what people will say if we stay." Still he didn't answer. She studied him, then rolled over. Reed sat awake a long time, staring at the fire, realizing he wasn't guarding his cabin anymore. He was guarding something forming inside it, and he didn't want it to leave. Riders ever came. The cabin that once held only echoes now carried laughter, shared work, and the quiet comfort of people who had chosen one another. Reed stopped watching the horizon, like a hunted man, and started looking at the land like a future. The women planted, built, carved, cooked, and slowly stitched their lives into the walls. Cyan stood beside him through it all. Not rescued, not owned, equal, steady home. What began as a single night of mercy became a family forged by winter, sealed by trust, and rooted deep enough that no storm could move them.